we are always viewing the future in our position in the world today, with what is important to us today. And so unless we start having the conversations about shifting what is important to us today, we are unable to see, we'll be unable to agree on kind of what are the policies or what is the structure that we want for the future. So these values are important, and they sort of determine how much care and compassion we are going to show to groups of people. That's exactly it. And we're very creative human beings at trying to find a way around these things. We'll invest in, we want to see the rise of green capitalism, or we want to invest in sort of techno solutions, etc. We don't want to admit, in that sort of addiction metaphor, we don't want to admit that there's a problem. We want to be able to find a solution to things from within the existing system.
Welcome to the first episode in English of the Being Human Myth podcast. Since it's the first episode in English, I feel it's important to speak a little about the name of the podcast. In Spanish, we have two words for the word being. We have estar, that makes reference to the physical aspect of our human experience, and we have also the word ser, that makes reference to the non-physical or invisible aspect of being human. In Spanish, the podcast is called El Mito de Ser Humano. Said that, the Being Human Myth podcast is a space where we seek to explore the power of myths and imagination in our culture and society, in the context of a humanity going through a liminal era and in transition towards our inner and outer world regeneration, and therefore leave a brighter future to the next generations and to all life on this beautiful planet we have as a home. Today, I bring you a conversation with Ruth Taylor. Ruth has worked in the field of social and environmental change for close to 15 years. She's driven by the question of how more people can be encouraged to think, feel, and act differently when it comes to the multiple and interconnected challenges we are experiencing globally. Currently, Ruth splits her time between working for the Common Cause Foundation, working to rebalance the values that we see championed in our cultures, and as a freelance narrative strategist, supporting a range of different organizations from NGOs to cultural institutions to consider how their work could help shift harmful narratives towards a more regenerative and just alternatives. Ruth also loves to write, and her work can be found on her Substack. It is called Culture Soup. I will leave all the links to Ruth's work in the show notes. Thank you for being here, and enjoy this beautiful and inspiring conversation. Okay, Ruth. Well, let me start by saying thank you. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. I'm excited.
Yeah, me too. I'm really excited. So this is a question I love to start the conversations. How was your call to adventure, to a life with meaning, purpose, values, and larger than yourself?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and one I actually sort of struggle to answer. I don't. When I look back on my kind of journey so far, I don't really think there was sort of one experience that brought me into this sort of work and into the belief that I have in people coming together to work for a transition, a better world. I didn't grow up in a sort of political family. I didn't have a particularly politically vibrant friendship group or anything. I grew up in a kind of very conservative part of the UK. But I think I always had a natural curiosity about the world and a natural skepticism, I think. I kind of remember even very early on looking around the world and thinking, surely we can do a bit better than this. surely this isn't it. And I don't think that's ever really left me. I have a tendency to kind of lean towards that sense of things could be better. There are ways that, things could be improved. Both in my kind of day-to-day work, but then I suppose also in that macro world stage, just think we could be doing better. So really it wasn't until university that I started to learn more, started to meet other people who were very thoughtful and reflective about why we were in the state that we're in the world. And I got involved in sort of some student activism, and that sort of brought me, made me realize that, you can make a career out of this sort of stuff. And like, if that's possible, why would you do anything else? Surely this is the purpose that feels the most important. And that's it. That was it for me, really. I have never not worked in the sort of progressive space. Still very much learning all the time and really reaching for that kind of what's the best work that I could do, what's the best impact that I can make in my small role within this kind of much wider movement. And I don't think you ever get an answer to that. I think that's just something you constantly have to be seeking and exploring and thinking about. It's been a winding path, but a good one, a fun one.
Yeah, and in this journey you've been going through, what has been like your main challenges you have encountered in this life of looking for value and purpose and all this?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I suppose there were lots of challenges. One being how you have to sort of face your own complicity in the systems that you are actively wanting to see brought down. So, I live in London, one of the richest cities in the world. I want a nice house and I want to go on a holiday and I want to, fly to other parts of the world and etc. Like I embody the values that we are taught to embody in our kind of Western modern day societies. And yet I want us to have a drastically different economic system. I believe that we all need to reduce our kind of carbon footprints, both individually and at the societal level. So, you're constantly confronted, I think, when you're working in this space, your own behaviour, attitudes and values. And that can be very challenging, I think. So I'd say that. I'd also say on a more sort of organisational level that often our organisations are not looking deep enough at the problems that we are, claiming to care about. So we tend to get very focused on short term, or what I tend to call upstream responses to the crises that we're all experiencing. And of course, that's important. Like people are struggling today, or, living beings in this world are struggling today, and we need to do things today to support them. But how can we be making sure that we're also really looking at those root causes, and not just picking the easiest responses or the things that don't feel that challenging to the status quo? I've found that a real challenge in my kind of career. That's been the biggest source of frustration, and continues to be the biggest source of frustration for me. This kind of, yes, this is all well and good, the work that we're doing, but this is not going to get us to the place where we need to be for true kind of global flourishing.
I agree.
Yeah.
And talking about the root causes, what influence do you think myths, narratives have on our decisions and society as a whole?
Yeah, it's a super good question. One I spend a lot of my days now kind of considering. I think our brains as human beings are very lazy. Like we cannot possibly compute all of the information that we receive sort of every minute of the day. Our senses are alive to the world around us. We receive so much sort of input or data, if you like, that we cannot possibly comprehend all of that. individually, sort of one thing at a time. We can't possibly do that. And so our brains sort of create these like shortcuts to meaning making that help us to process the world that we're living in. And narratives, I think, are kind of exist within that family. So they're commonly understood ideas that groups of people across cultures have that help them to make sense of the world that they're living in. And they're often sort of fairly subconscious. We don't read a newspaper article or walk down the street and be observing the world around us. And we don't have a kind of internal conscious monologue about, oh, what narratives do I think I shall use to help me understand what I'm seeing? But, they're there and they're really powerful. So I think they influence us because they help us to decide what we think is true, what we believe to be important in the world, and what we believe to be real, kind of reality. And that in turn kind of influences how we act and think, how we decide to show up in the world, how we make values judgments on what we should or shouldn't be doing, or what is or isn't important. And obviously that's happening, multiple times a day. So yeah, they're really important. And of course, narratives are, we're reinforcing them implicitly or explicitly, knowingly, unknowingly, all the time, in the ways that we ourselves are showing up in the world. So we also have this influence over others. So it's a kind of cyclical process, I suppose.
Yeah. And that what you were saying about it led me to all the information we're getting now in our devices and the computer in this electronic era we are living in. And now that we are entering the era of AI, how do you feel about myths and narratives about entering in this new era, completely unknown, and as a collective humankind that we have in a kind lost our stories and our myths, and we are entering in a completely new era without that myths. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, it's really difficult, and I must say, I feel sort of slightly overwhelmed by the rise in AI. Obviously, AI has been around for a long time in sort of to a lesser degree, but it does feel like it's really ramping up in terms of its development, and it's definitely not an area that I feel like I know enough about. But I guess what I feel about it is that it's another layer of sort of dehumanization, or another layer of separation in the world, instead of conversations between human beings, or kind of interaction with the natural world that we're a part. There's another technology that kind of gets layered into our experiences, that causes us to think or feel certain things, again, often really subconsciously. To me, it's very difficult to say sort of what myths or what narratives or what stories we need, because we are subsumed, we're like immersed in the culture today. What is deemed important today, or what's the kind of what's the deep stories that we draw on to help kind of path our journey in this world. So things like economic growth, seeing economic growth as our means of salvation, or the kind of the myth of modernity, this constant progression that we are on, etc. These sorts of very, very deep stories that we hold about ourselves and the world, that lead us to make decisions about the kind of systems and the structures that we design and live our lives by. I think the tendency is to be quite binary and say, oh, okay, well, we if kind of economic growth, like constant economic growth, is a really deep narrative that we have at the moment. What we need to replace it with is something about degrowth, for example. I think we're sort of blinkered. We can only see what we can see from our immersion in our dominant culture today. So I do think there's something about doing the work to lift us out of our current sort of submersion into a slightly different culture from which we can see further, and we can see different things. We can imagine different possibilities. We can imagine different myths. But yeah, it does feel that I don't think it's that we are like devoid of stories and myths. We have them. They're just not in service of a kind of interconnected relationship between human beings and the natural world. And that's a real problem.
Yeah, I think we need like modern myths that talk about the era that we are living in, and
Yeah.
the things that we have to work out in this transition,
Mm.
and I feel that we don't have these inspiring myths that propel us to a brighter future, and I really feel we can create them locally. I feel, and at the same time globally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Is it, people's experiences are rooted in their everyday. This is one of the challenges that comes with sort of NGO communications work, which is a lot of my day-to-day work is in that space, and I think it's really important, but it can't be the only way that we're trying to reach people. What somebody hears, from an NGO about a particular social or environmental issue is important, but if that's not mirrored, if the kind of values found in that message aren't mirrored in their experience, just in life, going to the shops, I don't know, speaking to a neighbour, going to the doctors, do you have access to healthcare, etc. All of that's where values really kind of come to life and narratives really come to life. And so, yeah, that this work it's grassroots and local and about everyday life, and often NGOs are sort of a little bit removed from that space, I think.
Yeah, me too. You talked about values. I want to enter in that values spaces because I really love it. Can we start by you telling us what's the difference between values and principles?
Yeah, so values are as a word, it's really open to use in lots and lots of different ways. So when you say it as a word, it brings to mind so many different things. We hear a lot about, definitely here in the UK and in the US, about sort of the importance of family values. Or, if I said, oh, Alex has great values, maybe I'm thinking, you're trustworthy and kind and honest, etc. We talk about our organizational values, what values are driving our work, etc. So there's so many sort of popular uses of the term values. And as you sort of said, it sort of becomes interchangeable with other terms. So values sometimes is used to talk about principles. Values is sometimes used to talk about norms or attitudes or ideologies even, etc. But in my work, I work for the Common Cause Foundation based in the UK, and we build on a body of social psychological literature. So this is like a body of academic study into human and cultural values. And within that field of study, there's a particular definition of values being the sort of guiding beliefs that you have that help you assess, help you evaluate different kind of experiences or behaviors in the world. So we tend to use that, and then values has a very specific meaning. Principles, as well as other things, attitudes or beliefs, worldviews, they sort of stem from values. So your principles might be something like, you really place a lot of importance on honesty, and that's a principle that you hold. But that will be for a reason. That will be because of certain values that you have sort of they're important to you, and those are normally formed in your childhood or in your sort of teenage years through how you've been brought up, your parenting, or how you've been educated, or the sort of social context in which you've grown up. So yeah, values are like they're sort of a bedrock and they're like a real foundation for the ways that we then as individuals choose to live our lives.
Mm-hmm. And how do you think values affect the way we relate with others, with life, with ourselves?
Yeah. So in the literature that we draw on at Common Cause, there are two sort of groups of values that we speak about a lot. Benevolence values, which are kind of a group of values that they sort of signify the love, the solidarity, the care that you have for people that you're in frequent contact with. So that could be your friends and family, it could be your local community. Depending on the context, it could stretch to groups that a psychologist might define as like your in group, however you define that. So that could be, people that are in the citizens, fellow citizens in the country that you're in, or the state that you're in, etc. That's one group. And another group is universalism values, which are values which signify the kind of love and care and solidarity that you have for people that you aren't in frequent contact with, maybe people you'll never meet, a different side of the world, speak a totally different language, follow a different faith, etc., have a different skin color. They and universalism values also extends to the sort of non-human life in the world. So these values are important, and they sort of determine how much care and compassion we are going to show to groups of people. So if I place a huge amount of priority on benevolence values, but I don't place any priority on universalism values, what does that look like when I'm then thinking about immigration, for example, or even climate activism? So it does sort of tend to be that the majority of people place a huge amount of priority on benevolence values. Universalism values are still also really important to more people than we would assume, but they're not as important as benevolence values. So it does affect how we interact with others, with the wider world, and our values are being kind of primed and strengthened all the time. So just living my life, my values are kind of being primed constantly. I like to think of it as kind of like a little light bulb that sort of goes off in your head when you're having different experiences. And the more those light bulbs are going off, the sort of stronger those values are becoming for you. So it's really important when we're thinking about the kind of wider culture in which we're in. Is our culture prioritizing, strengthening, championing values that lend themselves to solidarity, community, kind of love, cross borders, or is it emphasizing, competition, power over, etc. So yeah, values are hugely important in determining sort of interhuman relationships, but also relationships between humans and non-human life.
Yeah, I was reading your work in Common Cause Foundation, and I was reading the extrinsic and the intrinsic values you mentioned there. That really got my attention. I really feel that that's important. Can you talk us about the extrinsic and intrinsic values, please?
Yeah, absolutely. So intrinsic and extrinsic values are terms that we use as kind of umbrella terms, if you like, for different groups of values. So intrinsic values are values that are inherently rewarding to us. So intrinsic values includes things like equality, social justice, protecting the environment. Also includes things like creativity or freedom, helpfulness, etc. Extrinsic values are values which seek some sort of external approval or reward. So extrinsic values are things like wealth or power or status or public image, ambition, etc. And what we know from the literature and the studies that have been done, over many years, is that these two sort of sets of values, intrinsic and extrinsic, are in tension with one another. It's very, very difficult it's not impossible, but it's very psychologically difficult for a human being to place importance on an intrinsic value at the same time as playing importance on an extrinsic value, and vice versa. They're almost kind of on a seesaw. When one's engaged, the other is disengaged, and vice versa. So they're very important sort of groups, like umbrella terms for values, and helps to remind us that there is this relationship that these two kind of groups of values have to one another, to remind us about, okay, well, what values are we engaging in other people in the work that we're doing, but also what values are engaged in society. If we're in a society, I argue we are, that is constantly priming or engaging our extrinsic values. In other words, constantly reminding us of the importance of wealth. You're going to be happy if you're rich, or reminding us about your worth is wrapped up how popular you have, or how popular you are, how many followers you have on TikTok, etc. We are constantly having our attention drawn to extrinsic values, which we know then means our attention is being drawn away from more intrinsic values, things like protecting the environment, equality, social justice, which has a knock-on effect for our kind of move to a different way of living and being on our shared planet.
Yeah. How do you feel we can make these values like more noticeable? How can we like see them, make them visible, and feel them?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think values have become a bit seen as quite wishy-washy. This sort of, I don't know, you talk about values and it's translated, or what is brought to the forefront in people's minds is this kind of sense of, we all just need to be nicer to one another. And yeah, we probably do need to be nicer to one another, but value, having an understanding of values and bringing that into our work is so powerful, and it goes far beyond just sort of being a bit kinder. It really brings to life this sense of how are we structuring our societies, what things do we want to be championing and prioritizing, and how by those choices, what the effects of those choices are. I think one of the reasons why values is maybe needs a bit of a rebrand is that we're seeing sort of declining levels of religious following, not in all countries in the world, but definitely in lots of the sort of Western nations, especially. We actually have very few places in our sort of societies where we reflect and we share about our values. Very few instances are we given opportunities to actually really consider what our values are or how they show up in our lives. And so I think it's become almost a sort of a lost language, if you like. It's not something we talk about anymore, or very, very rarely. And so it doesn't seem to have the same kind of power that maybe it once did. I wonder whether, as we sort of start speaking more about the power of culture change, whether we will see a resurgence in speaking about our values. Yeah, I don't know. We'll have to see, I suppose.
How would you rebrand the values? Do you have any?
I don't know. It's such a good question. I now tend to talk about cultural values and not just values. I think cultural values makes it sound weightier for some reason. Helps to pave a conversation into the fact that it's not just our values as individuals, it's collectively we hold values. Collectively we have decided we're going to place a huge amount of prioritization on economic wealth over and above protecting our environment. Hence why, we have the kind of capitalist neoliberal system that we have. There's something about reminding people that their individual values are important, but there's also this kind of collectivity around values, which I think is useful. So I suppose I'm trying to sort of extend or enlarge the kind of understanding of values by talking about cultural values. Maybe the word values itself needs to be dropped and we need to think of something else. I'm not sure what that would be. But maybe it would make it feel sort of weightier and more powerful. I'm not sure.
Yeah, maybe a brainstorm or something like a game.
Yeah.
Last week, I participated in a collective imagination practice over
Amazing.
in the UK, in your country, and we did a beautiful exercise about creating new words,
Oh,
like
great.
coupling a couple of words together, and what new words came out, and it was beautiful. Maybe
Yeah.
idea for creating a new word for values, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I like it. That'd be a really interesting exercise to do.
Yeah. I want to change a bit the subject. This is a matter that's really interesting to me. Next month, in I believe the 20th, something like that, of September, it's going to be the Summit for the Future in United Nations, where this like the global leaders are deciding like what should the future look like for humanity. And every time I think about this, I feel so displaced. Like, okay, I don't know if one person represents all of my country. I
Yeah.
haven't been asked anything about what the future that I would like to have. So, do you think as a human family we should be able to co-create the futures we would like to live in, and how can we do it?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. It's what it brings to mind some work of a colleague here in the UK, John Alexander, who has worked a lot on changing the story of who we are in relationship to our governments, our sort of decision makers. So instead of subjects, sort of where we're told what to do, or consumers where we're not really given any say on the way that we live our lives or the way that we construct our societies. We're just expected to buy things and keep the kind of economic system, going and alive and well. John argues for a move to a third type of story where we see ourselves as citizens. We're able to co-create and we have opportunities to co-create the world in which we live. And that feels really important to me as a shift in our almost like the public story, the kind of idea we have of ourselves. It feels really, very important at the moment where there seems to be growing appreciation amongst the public that we are facing multiple crises that are interconnected, and especially when it comes to the climate, we're sort of just hurtling towards a cliff edge. Whilst our governments and those in positions of power, be they business leaders, etc., they have a vested interest in the current system continuing.
Yes.
And so it feels like there's this kind of push and pull beginning to happen quite visibly in activism spaces, but also in parliaments, etc., and governments across the world. So I would agree with you. I don't think anyone can ever decide what the future is going to be, because ultimately we're all a part of making that happen. I guess what worries me is the sense of so if I painted a picture for you of what I would like the future to look like, and I said, I don't want there to be any cars, I don't want anyone to be eating meat, I want us to be all growing our own food, maybe living more communally, etc., etc. If I painted that picture for you, there will be whoever you are, there will be things that make you think, I don't want to live in that world. Maybe I've said, I don't want a world where we have cars, and people are suddenly like, I can't imagine. I don't, my car is my route for freedom. That gives me the ability to move around and to see family and other parts of the country, etc., etc. We are always viewing the future in our position in the world today. with what is important to us today. And so unless we start having the conversations about shifting what is important to us today, we are unable to see, we'll be unable to agree on kind of what are the policies or what is the structure that we want for the future.
Yeah.
And that's really tricky. I think we kind of want to be able to get this sort of utopian kind of snapshot of what the future could be, and then communicate it in such a way that everybody agrees, oh yeah, that sounds great. But that's just not, we're never going to get to that place, because we're looking at that snapshot kind of through the lens, if you like, through the kind of glasses that we have today, that tell us actually what's important is you need a bigger car, you need a more powerful car, you need to consume loads of meat, or you need to, etc.
Yeah, it's crazy how we are so addictive to our current systems and our way of life, and we in this way that we are living, we are neglecting the future to the next generations, and we
Totally.
are leaving them like a really dark future. So should we have, you think, like in community spaces, in our minds, in our hearts, the next 7 generations, then when we make these decisions, for example, that one they are having in the UN, right? That they are so addictive to the capitalist system that it doesn't allow them to have in context the next 7 generations, because if they do that, they can't maintain the current capitalist system, right?
That's exactly it. And we're very creative human beings at trying to find a way around these things. We'll invest in, we want to see the rise of green capitalism, or we want to invest in sort of techno solutions, etc. We don't want to admit, we're, in that sort of addiction metaphor, we don't want to admit that there's a problem. We want to be able to find a solution to things from within the existing system, because ultimately we don't want to live a life with less consumerism, because everything in our culture tells us from the moment we're born that to be happy and to live a good life is to have stuff and to be seen as someone who is popular and powerful and good looking and wealthy, etc. And until we start undoing that myth, until we start undoing that story of what it means to be alive on this planet today, we're going to be continuing to fuel the kind of systems that are ultimately leading to the destruction of our natural world, but also this sort of separation between human beings. And it's not easy. If it was easy, we would have solved the problem by now. And that's part of the issue. It's not easy. And there's no other way. You've just got to push through it and do the work, I think.
Yeah, it's really complex. For me, it's very important. Like, well, this is super complex, as you're saying. Our education systems, they are basically interested in creating slaves, right? In getting people out of the machine so they can go out and serve them in their corporations to make the owners more money. That's why I really believe that we need a focus in values, in principles, but I am really interested in purpose education. I really feel that if the children, if the young generations get to explore how it feels to have a purpose in life at a young age, and like it will serve us to really turn the humanity's course. That's the way I feel.
I think education it's a hugely powerful time for the shaping of who you're going to be and what you think is important. Some of those like foundational narratives that you then carry with you throughout your life. And it's I agree with you. I think it's an area that isn't invested in enough in terms of seeing that as a route to liberation. I think there is real conviction in amongst people who do believe that is the way, that we believe that is the path, that truly believe it. And so the intention in education is like, we need to equip people to be as productive as possible, because that's what capitalism is obviously based on. But also we want them to live, we want them to, reach their earning potential, because we believe that is a happy life. I don't believe this kind of like that there's this sort of, I don't know, group of evil people that are somehow like controlling the world. I believe that, others have very different ideas to me in terms of what is needed to get to a place where we can live happy, healthy lives on a planet that is healthy.
Yeah, I agree.
And that's the problem. We're not really having that conversation.
How do you feel we can have more of these conversations?
I suppose, I think that it's challenging because of the sort of structures that now exist. So that are quite polarizing. So, our social media, the sort of the political system that we now have, that's often based on debate and shutting down arguments, and it isn't necessarily based on listening and conversation. I think values are a great way of connecting across difference. So being able to say, oh, you believe that everyone should live a happy, healthy life. I believe that, but we believe that to get there, we need to do drastically different things. Like, let me explain why I believe that we are going to get to this place through this route, and then I'll hear from you as to why you think something different. That to me surely feels like the starting point. The means are important to me. I don't believe that if we are going out yelling and screaming and hating on each other, we are going to end up in a world that is built on love. I just don't believe that trajectory will work. I think the means need to also be filled with that sort of reverence for life, be it human life or non-human life. The kind of means to get to this world has to channel that too. And that for me definitely begins with places and spaces to listen to one another, to connect, to start healing some of that separation that is so embedded in our kind of modern day societies now. So citizens' assemblies, I think, are exciting. Those feel like really ripe spaces to connect with one another. Yeah.
I love what you're saying. In fact, that's basically what we are doing in our project here in Mexico with the collective imagination we are launching. Basically, I really feel that it should begin local. Like, if we can make the changes locally, we eventually can create an impact globally. And this leads me to something, one of the most important questions I feel I have. It's like, the capitalist system is so perfectly connected. If you want to buy something, as I said before, like, you can get anything with one click, really fast, really quick. But when you are a change agent, when you are like looking to create social change, it's so complicated. Everything is so disconnected. I was looking at your blog, when all the links you left for the narrative change and all that. I really love that, because in one place I have a lot of links that people I can reach to contact them, send them an email, like to have this conversation like the one we're having right now. But I really feel that we need like integrated maps where we can connect all the people that want to make a brighter future, right? And have you found it? And my question is, why don't we have it? I mean, we have the tools, we have the know-how, we have the technology, we have the
Yeah.
artificial intelligence. Why we don't have it?
Yeah. I think, yeah, I really agree with you that sort of feeling, you know, knowledge is power a lot of the time. I guess I don't think we have it because I don't think we're defining the problems that we're facing in the right ways. So we're if I take an issue like homelessness, you know, I live in London. It's a very wealthy city, and yet homelessness is increasing year on year. More and more people are experiencing not having a home, and are needing to live on the streets and beg for money, etc. If I'm looking at that as a problem, what we tend to do is respond to the immediate challenge. So I might say, okay, I'm going to go and, with the support of maybe my local government, etc., I'm going to build a homeless shelter to make sure that people are not living on the streets. If I've got a little bit more sort of insight, I might say, okay, well, I'm going to go and lobby my MPs to ensure that there is more housing available for people, etc. So I'm starting to look at what some of the systemic problems might be. I never get to a point, or it's very, very rare for us to get to a point where we're saying, okay, when we go back and back and back and back, and we're looking, okay, what caused that problem? What caused that problem? What caused that problem? To get to a place where we say, oh, do you know what? We have the wrong ideas of the ways that we should be living together. We're not understanding each other well enough. We're prioritizing the wrong things culturally. We're holding these sort of stories about what it means to live a good life that just aren't true. They're not fit for purpose. We don't get to that point. And so when I'm thinking about, okay, I want to solve this problem of homelessness by creating a homeless shelter, I only have to speak to a few people about that because it's an immediate challenge. Or even if I'm thinking about, you know, trying to get a policy into law, or speaking to speaking to the government, etc. There's only a limited number of people I need to be in contact with for that. But when you're going back to root causes, suddenly everything is connected and everything affects everything. And suddenly you're needing to be far more connected. You need to draw on the understandings and the expertise and the experience from so many different areas of life. But that often isn't how we come at trying to solve the challenges that we're experiencing. And so I don't think we have that kind of, we don't seem to see the importance of that level of connection. And so, you know, it doesn't get funded, and then it doesn't happen.
Yeah, I agree. And that leads me to the last question that I really, really love this question. Thinking about as a humanity, as a whole, as a family, that we all live in one planet. It may seem that another countries might seem very distant and we see them maybe as aliens, right? But we all live in one planet. And I really feel that as a humanity, we need to have a common purpose. This common purpose, how do you think that should be our common purpose for this family, for this human family?
Yeah, that's such a profound question. And I can answer it, you know, from as one person living on this planet today. I think we have a common purpose now, which is to shift the cultural paradigm of modernity to move us into this next phase of human and planetary existence, which is ginormous. I mean, what a task! That's big, and that requires just millions of people and collective wisdom massively. I think then in terms of like what I see our common purpose as being as humanity sort of on this shared planet, I have a quote that I come back to and I now cannot remember who it's by. You'll have to put it in the show notes. But there's a quote about how we're all just walking each other home. Like there's this sense that, you know, our life is fleeting and our relationship with the natural world is one that can be really precious. And at the moment, we don't have that kind of built into our systems. And there's a lot of division between humanity, but ultimately we're all going in the same direction. There's something about a common purpose of sort of treading lightly on our shared planet, enjoying its abundance and its beauty, and celebrating what it means to be alive in the very fleeting time that we have with other human beings on this earth. I don't think it's any more complicated than that. And yeah, if we can co-create together a system, a way of being for humans and non-human life that allows us to live in ecosystem and well and in reverence to one another, I think that purpose is absolutely doable. It feels far off, but I don't think it's impossible.
I love that answer. Thank you very much, Ruth. It's been a pleasure to have this conversation with you. Thank you for your time. And well, this is the Being Human podcast. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alex.